Good afternoon, everyone. So once again, thank to the Global Digital Cultures team, because they, first of all, we are part of the team with our project Davide Peraldo that is now connected already, and Giovanni Rossetti that is also within the room. Our project is titled Local Global Boss and Local Workers. And for this seminar, we decided to change the title with My Boss is an Algorithm. I am delighted to have as panelists, as speakers, Niels van Doorn, Assistant Professor of New Media and Digital Cultures at the Department of Media Studies at UFA, and then Julie Uchie Chen from Toronto University as Assistant Professor of the Institute Communication, Culture and Information Technology in Canada. So thank you for accepting our invitation and thank you for being here. Well, I will tell you briefly how the seminar is organized. It's more a discussion, so we didn't have any slides. We prefer to leave it open and to create a sort of dialogue between our two speakers. So the first half an hour will be dedicated for the discussion, and it will be extended for some clarification at the beginning, and then we will open to the audience for the Q&A part session. That's how I will start. And well, we have prepared some questions for our speakers. And obviously, Julie and Niels, you are free to elaborate more, to clarify my questions. And well, I will just start. We would like to start by addressing the experiential dimension of food delivery riders, or even if you prefer at labor more at large. And then I also want to mention that from time to time, I will refer to the article as point of reference that you have shared with us. And the article is called Ads Stacked Against Workers, Statify Gamification on Chinese and American Food Delivery Platform, which is a forthcoming publication on Socioeconomic Review Journal, if I'm not mistaken. So that's also something that I will add into the questions when I have a reference from your article that we have read. So the part of the experiential dimension of food delivery riders is quite crucial, and especially in the platform labor more at large, as we said. So we would like to explore what are the main issues here, and in particular, how do you reckon the status of having an algorithm as a boss? And we refer in particular to the relation to the device, to the time management issues and accountability. So this is our first question for our speakers.
I think I was first in this one, wasn't I? Yeah. Yeah, so well, first of all, thanks for inviting me and us. I feel like there's a real us with Julie and I, because we just finished finally this article that we worked on for a very long time, and that will now finally be published soon. It's an early version is on our platform labor site, but a very much improved and revised version will come up soon. So that's why I kind of feel like you're inviting us as co-authors or something. But yeah, so to answer the question, I want to first start with a couple of caveats or disclaimers or something. I always have a bit of a problem with the notion of algorithm as a boss, because, well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, when I talk to a lot of the people I talk to, a lot of the writers in these different cities, so my research focuses on food delivery and care platforms in Amsterdam, New York, and Berlin, right? So there I did a lot of field work, talked to a lot of writers. And when you ask them about this, hardly anyone actually thinks, well, sometimes they don't even think about algorithms, first of all, right? And if they think about algorithms, it's not really as like a boss or anything. And a lot of people, they are concerned with, what they usually it's a they, Deliveroo or Uber Eats, is making them do or may expect from them. But it's not like this having an algorithm as boss is not like a local conception or something. So first of all, and then second of all, of course, what algorithm are we talking about? Right? Are we talking about the pricing algorithm? Are we talking about the allocation algorithm? Are we talking about the deactivation algorithm or the performance method? You know, there's a variety of different algorithms depending on the platform and the operational system. So that's another thing. Like what algorithm would then be the boss? That would already be a distributed system. And that's the thing. I think what they're noticing, rather than having the boss as an algorithm, what many of them are explaining to me, and what I've noticed myself as well, is that you're rather part of a cybernetic system which constantly kind of forces you through feedback, negative feedback loops, to make the right decision. and you learn, and then you adapt. And I think that's like what we call an activity system, following Philip Egger there, rather than having an algorithm as a boss. And then the other thing that I want to say as a caveat, before actually briefly answering the question, but because I do this because I do think it's very important, is the heterogeneity of the rider experience, right? So there are different platforms with different operational systems and business models. There's different urban settings, and especially also differentially situated riders. So for some of them, they don't even really care. But those who do depend on the work do care and are much more invested in like trying to work with the algorithm, if you will, with the system. Now, having said all that, I think one thing that does mark generally the experience of riders, at least as I have found it, is uncertainty. So that's like the characteristic trait that, of course, you know, Julie also has found, and a lot of our colleagues have found as well, so in different settings. But uncertainty really marks their experience, to the extent that algorithmic management not only functions to automate, but also to obfuscate. So to kind of create a buffer or a barrier where it's very difficult to kind of have information, or let alone accountability on management decisions. So that I would say is the main theme for me, the experience.
Julie, would you like to thank you.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I have the same feeling as Niels. I feel the timing of this webinar is kind of like, you knew that we covered the piece, but I know it's probably not because of that, but thank you. And thanks for everyone for coming. I know today's focus is it's going to be like more on food delivery workers. I just wanted to say very briefly to set the stage for some of my later discussions, that I have also done some research on the drivers on the ride-hailing platforms, and my research site is mainland China. So have said that, speaking of the experiential dimensions, you know, workers' experiences on those, particularly food delivery workers, and regarding well, the roles played by algorithms. My main findings are actually, especially in the Chinese labor market, algorithms very seldom functions just like alone. In most of the cases, actually, what really happens is the food delivery riders will have, well, two bosses, like human managers as well as algorithms, if you will. But most of the time, as Niels has already pointed out, there is not just one single algorithm, like master algorithm. No, there are multiple different types of algorithms, and they constantly change. However, the role of human management is very, very important. So I will give you just a very quick overview of what's going on in the Chinese market. For food delivery workers, actually it's the same for the drivers on the ride-hailing platforms. There is this issue of the so-called multiplication of labor, meaning that there are, at least for food delivery workers, there are 4 different types of riders. So there are those who are hired by the platform directly, and especially in the earlier stage, they usually enjoyed like decent pays. Sometimes they also have labor protections. That's a lot of incentives. That's because at an earlier stage, digital platforms wanted to use cash to expand their market share rapidly. And considering the market, there is constantly new players getting into the market. So from a worker's point of view, they can kind of like they can always find a new platform to jump into. So that's what the first type. The other types are, there are also those workers who are actually hired on a full-time status by the third party temp staffing agency. And in that case, actually, based on the statistics that we collect in Beijing, the proportion of these subcontracted full-time riders are actually growing among all the workers. The percentage is growing, and they have a relatively strict like hierarchy of manager. The headquarters, their divisions in different regions of the nation, and at the city level, at like neighborhood level. The neighborhood with 3 kilometers radiator. So that's kind of very strict, and those riders. They work on dispatch mode, so they are not. Dispatch mode is more like what's happening in like Europe, in the States. So they wait for the orders to be sent to them, and they have relatively fixed work schedule, which is like very different from gig riders again in North America and Europe. This is the second type, and the third type would be more equivalent to the independent contractor riders in the US and the European context. And that's what's called crowdsourced riders. So they don't have like time constraint, they don't have to stick to full-time schedule, and etc., etc. However, especially in the past 2 years, those crowdsourced riders are increasingly being recruited and sometimes also being managed in one way or another by human managers. So they are not like, okay, I see the ads, I'm going to sign up, and etc., etc. No, they are actually intentionally targeted and recruited by the third-party temp staffing agency. And the fourth type is those actually who are hired by the restaurants. So they only work for one or maybe a chain of the restaurants in different locations. It's usually in one restaurant. The typical example is Starbucks. So like Starbucks, they have like their deal with the food delivery platforms, so they get the chance to manage. Well, they don't call it a manager, but they have a lot of managerial power over how the riders look and etc., etc. So I would like to say it is always intertwined from the workers' perspective, that all this management, all coming together. And I also would like to address another issue related to time management. So this is just like a very typical instance, time management of how algorithms and human managers and the management policies work together. So what happened in China, but I also see it starts to become more applicable to riders such as like in Paris. I watched a documentary on them. It's the fact that food delivery platforms increasingly implemented this kind of like policy that orients towards timely development, timely delivery, meaning that the riders will have to deliver on time. Otherwise, delays or disruptions, mainly delays, overtimes, will be punished like severely. Usually they would cost like half a day or even 1 day wage. So what that really works is, it's not just depending on how algorithmic calculation of the delivery time, that usually not working for the riders, but also for those who work or being recruited by the third-party staffing agency, as third-party staffing agencies. They literally will have team to review the statistics every day, and will have very strict punishment policies, and etc., etc. So yeah, I will just leave it there, because other questions I can elaborate a little bit more on other aspects.
Heterogeneity is key, and
Yeah,
exactly. I think that's really illustrated by what Julie just said, that there's just so many different models, different strategies, and different experiences.
Yeah, and after your thank you for elaborating on that. After your responses, I also think that sometimes personally, I tend to refer to Uber as a evil, but then there are, of course, a variety of other kind of business models that can be equally problematic for workers. But what we have in mind is, again, the sort of algorithmic perspective and the Silicon Valley that has a particular kind of effect and impact of on the workers. But if heterogeneity is the key here, there is also another part that we consider also with Davide crucial, which is also from a more managerial point of view, how do platforms manage workers for the sake of efficiency? And Julie already introduced one aspect, which is a time management, so this aspect. But what I would like to know also more from you is the aspect of the gaming the system, right? So if heterogeneity is a peculiarity of the riders, there is also probably one dogma or one important part for platform, which is this tendency to propose gamification as a way of organizing their workers. So could you elaborate a bit more on that? Maybe you would.
Yeah, of course. So before I go over there, I would like to just share a picture, which I actually draw kind of like to show you how actually, can you see it? This is like a timeline from 2013 to like current. This is one example of food delivery workers, food delivery platforms named Meituan. You will see the structure. You'll see the structure, and at the bottom, it's different types of riders. Just to be clear, currently, although there are new platforms always coming, so platform hire riders may still exist, but for the two main food delivery platforms, this is the dominant one. The other one is called Ele.me, which is owned by Alibaba. They almost disappear. So that's why I kind of like put it like this. So as you can see, the only reason that I would like to show this picture to give you a visualization of some sort of how the management structure of the of the digital platform companies actually will evolve, you know, as the platform developed to occupy a great majority of the market share, etc., etc. So okay. I'm going to stop sharing and to go back to the question about gaming the system. Okay, so this is the place that I would like to just talk a little bit about my earlier studies on the drivers on the ride-hailing platforms. So the heterogeneity of the labor market on the ride-hailing platforms are actually very similar to the food delivery workers in China. The taxi drivers also work on the ride-hailing platforms. You have private hired drivers, and the drivers actually hired by, like for instance, rental companies. So it's very similar. What I found on the drivers for ride-hailing platforms is that, especially in the earlier days, they actually engage quite a bit in the so-called game system, using their knowledge of the algorithms or algorithmic systems. I even call them algorithmic activism, you know, the way that they somehow actually know how to game the system. However, to draw maybe like a little bit unscientific comparison, I did not observe like a comparable scale of gaming the system among the food delivery workers. However, I actually found the delivery worker, the delivery riders, they actually engaged in the resistance tactics in different ways. Like for instance, they actually they of course they will participate in protests, in demonstrations. However, they would also remember, I said the proportion of full-time hired riders are actually increasing. The human manager or the manager level over there actually played the role of mediators. So they sometimes would actually engage in quote unquote more conventional ways of just negotiating or a work stoppage for a couple of days, so that the managers will just will raise the pay or some way to meet their demands. So that's something that I found kind of like interesting when it comes to the resistance tactics. The other thing is, so for food delivery riders, one of the most crucial things I have mentioned, I mentioned is the time, right? Timely delivery. So besides the traffic and restrictions in the neighborhood, in the buildings, etc., one important areas that they actually do not have any control over the time is how ready the restaurants are when it comes to food preparation. So what I found, what's very interesting among food delivery riders is some of the individuals actually it happened more frequently to female riders because they are outstanding among a male dominated workforce. They actually would intentionally cultivate social relations with the local restaurants, so that they were like, okay, yeah, I made a friend with the waitress or the workers in the restaurant who are actually handling the food preparation for all the delivery work. They would say, okay, we made a friend with them, so they are aware that, okay, this order should probably go ahead and such and such. So they are actually relying on a more like a cultural competence that they have to cultivate these social relations with others, so that they can help. So that's like an aspect that is non-technological, right? So I also found that's very interesting. So it's not just the riders as an individual, the human managers who are usually in charge of either a station or a team or group. Some of them, because their performance, in a very traditional organizational structure, their performance is depending on the riders' performance. So we also encountered like human managers. They would, on behalf of their riders, to, according to him, make good terms with local restaurants. So it's kind of like they're helping the riders. However, when it comes to the technological activism, I didn't see much except for those riders who are using social media to politicize, the labor exploitation, which is, by the way, no different from other, workers who are using social media for mobilization purpose.
Thank you very much, Julie, for that. Well, then, Niels, I will use as a point of reference then the article that you wrote, because then you propose the ACRES model. And in ACRES term, what Julie said is exactly that the primitive action, in a way, can be co-opted or can be not under the radar of the algorithm. So in the model that you use as a theoretical reference, indeed, you propose the first stage of analysis in which there are the basic entities of the food delivery industry, and then there are the relationship between these entities, and then the primitive action. So I maybe one part, especially because you have experienced on your skin to be a rider, what can you hack when you are a rider? What kind of tactics you can use to negotiate even more? Because this aspect is really interesting that Julie just shared with us, but I want them to dig more into that. And have you ever hacked the system when you were a rider in that sense?
I mean, there's not that many, it depends on what you call a hack, but there's not that many hacks. And indeed, a lot of things that you do and think is a hack is actually co-opted into that cybernetic system, and they learn from it, because everything you do, all activity data, we get to the topic of data in a moment probably, but everything you do is fed back into the system, and they, or the operations managers, data scientists, they learn from this kind of data and they optimize their systems. And this optimization sometimes works in your advantage because your activities are also optimized, but sometimes also not. There's three ways in which I've seen resistance, or at least trying to get the upper hand in this activity system. And by the way, one limit of the activity system model, and I know a lot of people that are watching now have not yet read that paper, so we cannot really go into depth because that would be a bit weird, wouldn't make so much sense. But one problem of that model is actually that it doesn't really fully take into account the regulatory and institutional setting in which these activity systems are developed, because it's a very much a computational scholar. His take is a computational systems analysis. So this embeddedness is a problem. But so 3 ways is collective rejection of orders. You'll see that with Uber Eats as well, probably. That you could see that as a kind of a way of collective bargaining, if you will, without the institutional labor market actors, labor market institutions. But there is a way, and I've seen that happen around me as well, in which people are like, okay, we've had it with these, the lower and lower prices for the orders, the fees. So you know what? If it gets under this, we're just all going to reject it. But of course, they need critical mass, and they need people that are not strike breakers. So it's scabs to still take it and then run with it, because then you basically lost. So it really requires an organized front, united front, and that's obviously in such a fragmented, heterogeneous labor market composition, multiplication of labor. It's very difficult, especially when there's so many different groups of migrants. Many don't really talk to each other. That's an issue, but that's one strategy. Another strategy that I saw, especially in New York, was people using an app that obfuscates your location, so they don't see where you are. I think Julie found this in her research as well, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you did. So that's also a common tactic, both to make them think that you are somewhere where you think they will get you the next order, or because you're literally, as somebody said to me, you're taking a shit somewhere in a restaurant and you don't want Uber Eats to know that, or you're writing for multiple, you're delivering for multiple platforms at the same time. You're multi-apping, and they don't allow for that. So then you have to obfuscate your location. And the last thing that in Germany, that in Berlin, that I noticed is, it's not really, you could call it a hack, is trying to reverse engineer, with a big quote unquote, the pricing algorithm. So collecting with your own app, collecting data on the orders that you've delivered, the time, the locations, the distances, and then trying to come up with how does this pricing algorithm work, and then you can kind of keep track of when it gets lower and what is happening. But again, it's really David against Goliath, and it's very difficult. And I'm always, I've grown increasingly skeptical about those kinds of resistance tactics.
Thank you for on that. Yeah, this morning I had a chat with a colleague of mine who is also working on riders, especially in Italy and France. And there was an article out, and it's quite new, on the European Journal of Industrial Journal. And then there was state that indeed there is a gap between discourses and resistance. So what we said before. And there is, of course, a diversity in the fact that the regulatory aspect of the local state apparatus or the national state apparatus plays a role in that. So it's also what we have seen in Italy with the riders of the gig economy was also due to a kind of action from the local state apparatus. So this is quite interesting also to move to the other aspect of our seminar today, of our webinar, which is related to the apps that are not only devices, that are not just devices that produce output that riders have to conform to, but they're also in a way surveillance devices. As you said, there are apps, I didn't know that, so it was quite interesting that there are apps that can cover your tracking system. So based on this surveillance aspect, those apps are also able, and those platforms are also able to collect a large amount of data. And as Niels said at the beginning, there is a huge variety of data. There is not one data. So what we want to discuss and what we want to ask you is, what kind of data are collected? And more importantly, what is the value of the data besides the obvious one that is optimizing per se the micromanagement of the workforce. And to give you some example, we were thinking about the training for automation or the boosting hype for speculative reasons. So if you can elaborate maybe on that, starting from Niels or...
Yeah, sure. So the good thing about getting these questions in advance is that you can not only think about it, but also think how to illustrate some of this. So I was working in Berlin as a delivery writer, and I at one point was thrown off the platform, deactivated with no good reason, I thought, so I submitted a subject access request under the GDPR, and then they're forced to give you at least, you know, a part of your data set, and also a nice document that explains what you're seeing, right, in all these files that you get. And I just want to share real briefly that document that shows or that illustrates what kind of data at least Deliveroo in Berlin, and I think outside Berlin as well. I think this is a bit more generic document than just Deliveroo in Germany. So here, wait, I'll make this a little smaller. So this document then has like categories of data. So just to give you an idea what kind of data they collect onboarding data, your account data, and current status data. Right, so you see a lot of like different elements of that here. Here you get data about the work that you have done as a delivery writer. So work sessions, when you went offline, the unassignments, or also of course your when you decline or when you accept. When there's zones involved, no longer, because now there's free login everywhere. But when there was still like zones, there was when you move zones, etc., or when you request to do so, etc., etc. Then you have planning data when there was still a self-scheduling tool. They let go of that, of course, for free login, that everybody can just log in whenever they want. But this was that kind of data with respect to the scheduling, rider fees data, feedback data, also like particular service that you've done, the types of rider support data, location data, usage of the app, and also probably what other apps you have open at what time, when you close the app, when you know, all this kind of information. And then they give you additional information about the data, which I found particularly interesting, and I highlighted a couple of things. This one is mildly interesting: to make the most efficient decisions when offering you orders based on factors like your location, to determine your level of priority, again with respect to access to your booking. But I found this particularly interesting, of course, to ensure improved efficiency of our services, as Letitia already said. Very generic, we don't know really what that means. But I found this other also quite revealing, like use this data to responsibly design, develop, and test new tools and processes to improve our business, systems, and services. Analyze the data about your rights, make certain assumptions about the type of promotional offers. So also in the concept of gamification, what bonuses and what schemes and incentives work for you and what not. When do you accept, when not? Does 2 cents less or just another target make a difference? These kind of things. And on and on. Train our algorithms, interact with you, enforce the terms of our supplier agreement, keep records of so it's also enforcement. So I'll stop the share here, just to then to get to the value. So that's the example of like what data, what kinds of data, and why do they, or kind of for what reasons. And then in terms of the value, it's of course we should then see we make a distinction between, say, the use or the operational value. As you said, optimizing systems, and not just systems of managing the workers, but especially how they use other types of data. So not only the delivery data, but food ordering data, because ultimately that's what they're really interested in. That's where the higher margins will be eventually, not in the low margin delivery business. That food ordering data tells you a lot about consumption habits, where people order, what kind of food, at what points of the day, what neighborhoods, etc. You can learn a lot, and then you can, first of all, sell that kind of data as a service to the restaurants to have them learn a lot more about who orders what, etc., so they can adjust their menus. Then you can, of course, do them one better by actually doing the dark kitchen thing, right? The ghost kitchen or dark kitchens, as Deliveroo Editions is a version of. And then they open that, and then they outcompete you because they have much more contextualized data than you will as a restaurant ever had. So that is ultimately, I think, one of the end goals. And I believe, and I've said this a couple of times, that delivery is a Trojan horse, was a Trojan horse to get into this food ordering, food data business. Because that's where the real profits eventually will hopefully be. But you have to, of course, first compete with the incumbents like Thuisbezorgd, takeaway, Just Eat's takeaway. How do you do that? You order, you get in there via something that they didn't offer in the beginning so much, these kind of delivery-based services. So that's all the use and the monetary value, and then finally, of course, there's this financial speculative value. Investors love data-rich companies, so you can draw them in with like a nice talk about automation and a lot of data and machine learning, etc., etc., etc. I don't think automation will come anytime soon in the delivery business. There's too many obstacles, literally, physically, but also regulatory. But investors still eat that stuff up. So hence the speculative value of today.
Yeah, thank you, Niels. And Julie, do you have anything to add upon?
Well, I just wanted to add what happened in the Chinese context. I would say, when it comes to data collections by the digital platforms, it's, the categories and different types of data is quite similar. However, for food delivery workers, especially when it comes to the digital surveillance apparatus, it's not just the food delivery workers actually being part of this surveillance apparatus. It is also, there is also a very important role played by the dominant social media platform called WeChat in China. So usually the stations and the workers, the riders who are hired full time, they are managed by managers, not just through like stations and the daily face-to-face meetings, but also they are monitored and organized through WeChat. There is a group function in WeChat, and they usually would do that. And they have implemented all kinds of worker monitoring like surveillance schemes through WeChat. Like for instance, they would ask them to, if they send a notice, they would ask them to upload their picture within 15 seconds. So basically, while riders are riding the bike or the e-bike in China, they have to stop actually because they only have 15 minutes to upload the picture. So the point of this is, it's not all this collecting data is not just implemented by the work platform per se. So in this case, for the food delivery workers in China, WeChat, which is belong to Tencent, also has a very important role in it. And speaking of the value of data, I also would like to emphasize the speculative nature of automation. The discourse of automation, which is ultimately devalue the human labor in the entire system. So it's not just the workers that have lost their control over the labor process, it's that the varialization of their labor has been consistently downplayed because of the speculative nature of either automation or datafication and everything. I really like, well, this is my third point. I really like when Niels has mentioned that the data collected by the digital platforms actually not just for operational purposes, they also would help them to branch into other sectors. So like for instance, there are two dominant food delivery platforms in China, Meituan, the one that I've showed the picture, the local restaurants and cinema booking services are the other major business that the company has done besides the food delivery services. So this is one evidence to support Niels' statement that they are actually wanting to use the data that they collected from the restaurants and the other local services to help them to help their compatibility in other branch of the business. However, for the other dominant players in the food delivery platforms, it's called Ele.me, which is currently owned by Alibaba. Actually, it is owned by Alibaba in its divisions for local logistics. So it's a kind of like, well, they are doing different type of work as compared to carriers. However, they are belonging to the same divisions. From the point of view of the company. Obviously, it plays into the speculation, right? The aspiration of this e-commerce giant to eyeing for the so-called autonomous delivery or whatever human-less delivery logistics, right? So it is going to kind of like help them build into or boosting aspirations and imaginaries, which ultimately helps with the valuation of the company.
You know, the nice thing about studying these things, just very briefly, just in 2 sentences, but the nice thing studying this is that you never stick to what you're studying. It just develops into like all kinds of other like larger political, economic, and infrastructural issues that are going on, which are crucial to global digital cultures as a priority area. So there's just so much to dig into when you even begin with a thing like Uber Eats or Element or something.
Well, indeed, thank you for both insights, because I was already thinking about Funda, which is the main platform to find a house here in the Netherlands, which will not sell the house per se, but also the riders, the menu. So I'm already envisioning a very dark future in cities in which real estate will be definitely interested in knowing what the dwellers want in their neighborhood. And then just maybe is more an anecdote, but based on our preliminary results with Davide, we also discovered that workers, of course, know riders where they tip more. So they also have a knowledge about the city per se. So they are strategically also trying to stay in neighborhoods, especially and well, Amsterdam is out, where there are like the tipping is higher, but still is not enough as a resistance.
You mean where expats live, because Dutch people don't tip?
Well, that probably is then a reflection about my autoethnography when I tip the riders. But yeah, that I don't know about the Dutch. I always thought that Dutch tips also as well. But anyway, thank you for the last answer. Well, talking about regulation in particular, that is something that is not covered in terms of literature maybe, and also is one of our main interests in the research. So already Niels and Julie mentioned that when we deal with digital platforms, we also deal with financialized platform capitalism. We'll deal with really macro political, economical issues, but talking and thinking about global platforms, which often exploit favorable regulations to maximize their profit and their, of course, the business model. One obvious question that rises is, what is the role of regulation then in this picture? And in particular, at which scale? Because also you refer often to scale in terms of like exploitation. And then the question is, at which scale the regulation will be more effective in terms of state or city or regions, and based on different contexts. And more importantly, is then regulation a solution, can be a solution alone, or what kind of more effective way we envision together?
Okay, I'd like to, okay, I can start. So I feel, well, scale or scalability is like the thing with digital platforms. However, especially for the work type that my research is involving, they are more likely in like the location-based services. It's very localized services. So I actually found the regulation. So first of all, especially for the ride-hailing platforms, there are already regulations existing in China. So the problem is not there is no regulation. The problem is there is lack of implementation. So the same thing with a lot of labor practices. It's not that there is no good labor protection law existing in China. It's just that there is a weak implementation or enforcement of that. So I feel the regulations for the digital platforms, even if for the platforms that are operating in multiple different countries. So the local level, at the city level, is very important. And I feel that would relate well. Of course, national level it's important as well. And another very important, but I think less talked about level is transnational level. I feel it may it may appear applicable more to platforms like Netflix, Airbnb, and other like crowd work, not location-based services, but crowd work platforms like Amazon Mechanical Turk. However, how to regulate them transnationally is very important to set up, labor standard or labor protection standards, something like that. But also, since we just talked about data, regulations on transnational data flow is very important as well. So I think one tricky thing, maybe it's a bad example, however, it really says something, is the TikTok operating in the US. So now TikTok, is kind of like have a separate operation so that TikTok can continue to operate in the US, in Canada, Australia, and maybe there is another country. So that's because they have to, abide by the local law or for the data flow. However, I feel for the work platforms, a very similar thing needs to happen to find a way to really regulate the transnational flow of data for those companies actually operating in multiple different countries. So that's for regulation. Oh, by the way, I didn't find any specific labor-oriented regulations for food delivery riders in China. There are regulations related to consumer rights and food safety, but there isn't any like substantial regulations for workers. However, maybe some of you have already know, but just in case that you are not aware. However, I feel optimistic at the current moment, because it seems to me that at the current moment, the Chinese government, the central government, seems to have the political will to regulate the monopolies in China. The recent of Alibaba. So and the publicity of the work conditions on those digital platforms started to really gain momentum in the Chinese media. So, well, I'm an optimistic person in general, so I feel a little bit optimistic to see more political will to regulate the food delivery platforms.
Yeah, so I'll keep it short.
Sorry, I forgot to, sorry to cut you off, Niels. I forgot to mention one last thing. Besides regulation, I feel cultural reimagination of what the digital society is, what is the commons, is very important. And if COVID-19 pandemic has taught us anything, it's actually our interdependence. Customers, workers, our interdependence in the society. So I feel it is also a very actually a very good moment for us to reimagine what the social roles of the consumers, or even to question the on-demand service, just-in-time labor, that kind of concept and practices. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll briefly comment, and then I guess we'll leave some time for questions as well.
Yeah,
it's hard to talk about a lot of these things in brief terms and in an hour. But look, the last thing we want, I think, is to regulate these food delivery platforms like regular low-wage employers, because then they're going to act like regular low-wage employers, and nothing good really has come from that, because low-wage employers are usually not the best when it comes to how they treat their workers. We see this now slowly moving, with Uber. Uber Eats is entering Berlin through a fleet model, which is basically just subcontracting to others. The same way they're dealing with the ride-hailing aspect of their the ride-hailing division. They use this across the globe, this fleet partnership model, and there's just so many examples of a horrific, even worse exploitation than the independent contractor free logging model. So this is something that's really problematic. You have to ask yourself, who do you regulate for and against, and who will be hurt? I think especially migrants, especially temporary migrants, will be cut off from this type of labor. Now, the other thing I briefly want to say is that these are not, there's another reason why you shouldn't do this, because they're just not regular type of businesses. They're platform businesses, as we just discussed. So I think what has to happen is that we have to take an approach that encompasses multiple levels, multiple scales of jurisdictions, and regulate them for labor on the national and EU level, for the hospitality and restaurant industry, local and national level, taxes, because they're huge taxes. They're not special in that sense, but they are in a way, because Uber, we just saw something in the news, Uber just kind of avoided paying like about 4.5 billion in taxes last year because of like some shit, like 50 shell companies, all of them, of course, housed in the Netherlands, and the Netherlands is a horrible tax haven, so etc. So we should do something about that, and we should also think about regulating financial investments. Right, what we see with just before Deliveroo's IPO, we saw that some institutional investors were saying that they're not going to invest because they had troubles with the business model and the future, blah blah blah, and they withdrew, and that also caused the stock price upon IPO to drop. Now, this was then a kind of an investor ethical citizenship type of thing. We could regulate for this, right? We could just make it impossible for institutional investors to invest in companies that have this kind of track record. And then there's, of course, competition law that we could leverage and the privacy data law. If we do that all at the same time, then you got yourself some regulatory, package that could actually deal with the complexity of platform capitalism.
Well, thank you. Well, indeed, the regulation is not about the state per se, but it's the state apparatus with all the other forces that can come into play. And of course, Amsterdam is not a very good example to see about to observe resistance from the bottom, or to see how also the city per se is not regulated, starting from the real estate market. But because
the city cannot do much, right? The city cannot regulate labor. That's not up to
I will shut up, because otherwise I will start another discussion about the city per se, and it's not what I want to do, but I really want to open up the discussion because it was so rich and so intense. Also, this last part touches all of us as consumer and as researchers. So I want to open the floor for the Q&A session, and then and then ask you, Julie and Niels, to provide some extra answers, juicy answers for the audience. So I don't know, Sinine would like to open the floor for the audience. They can unmute their microphone. I've seen some questions in the chat that I can also refer to. Okay.
Yeah, so
I see a comment by Jared. If Jared would like to elaborate on that, or otherwise someone else that would like to ask questions. Alex is there. Yes, sorry, Alex, I haven't seen your hand raised. Please.
I think Jared was before me, so if
no, go ahead. Mine's my lord, my piece is there. Go with your question.
Jared, I'm bad at managing the discussion part.
You're good. You're good.
So I don't want to go too deep into another discussion, but like when I saw the title of the original seminar, or whatever we're calling this, my mind wandered immediately to this piece by Ian Bogost in The Atlantic from 2015. I'll post it in the comments so you can read it in your spare time. I don't agree with all of it, but I think there is an interesting argument that he makes there regarding sort of how algorithms and computation in general have become almost deified in certain circles of contemporary culture, including critical takes on algorithmic, right? And this is where I think I really like kind of Niels's starting barrage, right? Of I don't want to talk about an algorithm as my boss, right? Because there is like different types of algorithms and those socio-technical constructs, and they're might be competing against each other or might supplementing each other, and there's still like a lot of human labor involved, right? But with that, still returning to Niels's presentation or the points, when you showed this document there, I noticed that one of the algorithms, and I guess all of them, but one of them was named, right? the placing algorithm Frank has a name.
Yeah.
So I would like to hear from you, and actually from the rest of the very interesting discussion panel, how do you see this trend in kind of personifying, anthropomorphizing algorithms under those working conditions? Like, what do we make of it?
You know what, Alex? I don't make much of it. You know why? Because it's I see it as a remnant of a bygone era. Error. Maybe that's a useful mistake there, but because this goes way back to Deliveroo's kind of start. Also, when it still used not independent contractors, but just hired their workers. At least they did in the Netherlands, right? And they already had Frank, and they came. You know, they really. This was when it was a very small scale business where everybody came together at the office and had chats and everything. It was a very different world. And they were already kind of talking with some of the managers about Frank, but Frank was of course not managed in the local office. It was managed in London. And it was kind of a way to indeed to anthropomorphize, but it was also kind of it was part of that quaint small era, and then it became more and more kind of complex, and Frank is still there, but it's kind of an object of lore and of kind of like that history. And it's, of course, they don't have a name for their pricing algorithm or any other type of algorithm, deactivation, things that determine deactivation. And it's actually, I don't see that as a trend at all in any of my research in other platforms. Uber Eats or Uber doesn't have any cute names for their algorithms or anything like that. So I actually, I don't associate that so much with the future as much as with kind of a past in which things were much more simple and you just had Frank rather than a more and more complex algorithmically mediated system. That's what I would say.
What happened if we run out of time? I'm asking to the nothing. Is that are we allowed to proceed with this?
We are definitely allowed to proceed. We will just tell everyone that the video will be available in case you have to leave. We would absolutely understand it, and everyone else is welcome to stay.
Okay, thank you, Celine, for this practical part. I would like to collect more. Well, I would like to stay with you and forever, but now, of course, I will collect more questions and try to wrap up also. So I have Jared and then Max, if I remember correctly the order. Jared, please. Maybe Jared left, then Max. Max, if you have your hand raised.
Yeah, sorry, there was a helicopter above my house. There were a lot of problems presented today. And I guess it was discussed a bit about legislation. But in addition to legislation, is there any, do you see any promising ways forward in terms of offering alternatives or workers' movements or something? I don't know, anything else? Or is it really about legislation and that's what's needed to address some of these major problems?
It's not either or, that's for sure. And legislation doesn't only have to be inhibitive, right? Legislation can also be generative. It can make things possible alongside more grassroots types of organization. For instance, if you're thinking about platform cooperativism or something like this, then that definitely will need state support in terms of funding, in terms of making a variety of things possible, making it easier to operate for these alternatives and making it less easy, much harder to operate for the corporate platforms. So that's one thing I would just quickly add, but since I've already answered the previous question, I will leave it to Julie to chime in to add more.
Oh, well, I feel there are a lot of optimistic signs. Like for instance, the unionizing waves that we have seen in the US, and there are, as I said, a lot of like publicities of work conditions in multiple different sectors happening in China. What I found very, very interesting is we'll see actually not just for workers with like relatively less economic and social resources, such as food delivery workers, but also tech workers who are presumably You know, they are kind of like the first generation of the imagined, you know, white collar or a creative labor, but we also see them actually starting to organizing and try to protect their worker rights and to raise awareness of that. So I would say like nowadays, actually employment, work relations has become a very heated, you know, discussion topics and research topics in academia, and also, as I said, we have seen a lot of, you know, waves of unionizing across different countries. So I think those are very good signs. And of course, you know, there are mixed results considering what's happening in Alabama for Amazon workers. There are mixed results, but still, I feel we can be optimistic. Well, we have to stay optimistic whenever the opportunities comes up to mobilize and also to raise awareness, because I feel recognition of certain type of labor is work, recognition of workers as human beings are actually very, very important, not just as the first step, but also as just a political issue to recognize they are as like social beings. Yeah.
Thank you, Julie. And also, well, now it's 5. So we are officially out of time. So I just want to wrap up and thank you everyone for being here today. Our speakers, thank you for your discussion and your amazing, your new insights also from the paper, but also from this debate today. Well, as I said, I would like to keep it on and then to keep the discussion on, but I guess you also have other things to do for today in general, all of us. But thank you very much for today. I want to really celebrate this moment because it was our first meeting for our first seminar for the project, but also nice to see the crowd and nice to see your faces. And I really look forward. I am also optimistic as a person in general. So I just see a brighter future for this and for the rest of our passions and researches. So thank you.
Physical space soon at one point.
Yes, I want to be.
Yeah, exactly. I would love that.
To gesticulate more in a physical space. And yeah, again, thanks Niels, thanks Julie for today. And well, I don't want to say bye. I hate this moment. I will say bye.
I'm just kidding.
Okay, bye.
No, you hang up first.
Thank everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.